Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Modern Medusa podcast. My name is Dominique DeFalco, and I'm so excited to have our first official episode today with our very first guest. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thanks to Joe Phelan at Port City Pet for helping us get this started, and also a huge thanks to everyone who has been so incredibly supportive after our teaser episode. The love and support we've seen is just astronomical and out of this world, and it makes me so much more confident to bring this corner of the hobby into the light. So, as we get started, I have a very special guest for our first episode. Our guest today is not only an incredible keeper, but she is a phenomenal HOTS keeper. She's also an amazing admin for the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers group. And she's got so much stuff to share with us today. So, I want to introduce Elise Lago.
Hi, Dom.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for coming with us tonight. I'm so excited.
I am too. I'm so flattered that you would choose me as your first official guest. So thank you for that.
I couldn't think of anyone better. As we virtually met just a couple months ago, and you've been such an incredible advocate and educator to me for women in venomous keeping. And I was like, what's the first way to start off with a bang? Elise would be the way to go.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you.
Of course. So as we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little intro to who you are and what you do.
Sure. I am originally from Alabama, and laws are strict there regarding venomous. So I live in Mississippi now with my husband, and we both run E2Exotics. And we just kind of specialize in variety, if that makes sense. We try to offer a little bit of everything to everyone, and we also do educational programs and gotten pretty heavy in the industry within the last few years, especially as a team. My husband's been in the industry for a long, long time, but and I've kept, as a hobby for a long time, but I'm within the last 5 or 6 years is when I've become more, professional and sort of dedicated my life to doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know that you mentioned that you and your husband are E2Exotics. So I know that this is your full-time career now. Is that correct?
Yeah. We both got to kind of retire from our day jobs back at the end of, 2014. He was a delivery driver. I was a bartender, and we both just kind of decided, let's give it our all, and haven't looked back since.
That's so incredible. I know that's a dream for a lot of people. So,
oh yeah.
I would love to chat more about that. But before we get into what you and your husband do, can you tell me a little bit about your journey keeping reptiles? So when did you get into it? What was your first love reptile wise, and how that kind of evolved to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a typical story. I didn't grow up with reptiles, but I always had an appreciation for them. And the reptile house at any zoo I ever went to was just the highlight of everything for me. And growing up in the Bible Belt, like I did, reptiles, especially snakes, are just demonized, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They are Satan. And I never really thought that was accurate or fair. And I'm just, I always wanted to be kind of a spokesperson for them and dispel old wives' tales and myths, and because they're so prevalent, especially in the South.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. I guess I didn't really consider how, especially potentially religious upbringing can have such an effect on how you view reptiles and snakes specifically. Do you mind going into that a little bit more? Were you actively taught against like handling snakes and reptiles?
Not at all. My parents are some of the most kind, understanding, compassionate to everything people. So I had an amazing upbringing, and they, neither of them were religious, but he was Jewish and she was raised Episcopalian. So they kind of provided a little bit of both without too much pressure for either.
Mm-hmm.
So my siblings and I were able to choose basically, whatever we wanted to believe and whatever we wanted to do. Neither of my parents are animal people. We grew up with like a dog, and bunnies, but they weren't particularly reptile people, but they're both so supportive of everything that we do. And I know working with cobras and stuff makes my dad just so nervous, but but they're both great and just mega supportive. They love that I'm doing something that I love, and that's how they raised us. So personally, no religious anything or negative connotations regarding snakes, but I was exposed to it through the majority of people that I grew up around. So I actually got into snakes physically when I got with my first boyfriend around 16 years old. Okay. He was one of those guys that, just his mom would tell me stories about him toddling off into the woods in a rubber diaper and coming back with a king snake, but he was really into them and exposed me to all different kinds of species. And we started going to reptile shows together and, buying an animal here and there. And before we knew it, the collection had gotten out of hand real quick,
Yeah, I think that's how it goes. It's like a snowball. You get one, then you get four. And then once you're above 10, it really doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was little to no theme in the beginning, which I highly recommend not going that route, like pick a theme, stick to it. We were all over the place.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, about picking a theme? Because I know, I think a lot of people kind of get in the hobby and they're like, I want one of everything. So how did you kind of pick your theme or pick what you wanted to focus on?
Well, like I said earlier, I don't want to sound hypocritical. We don't really have a theme. We work with a little bit of everything, but for beginner keepers, I do think it's a good idea to kind of decide what you are passionate about and learn everything you can about it. Become just a pro in that specific species or family or whatever. And, when you're more comfortable, branch out. But we just kind of dove in head first, and that might work for some people. I don't personally recommend doing it, but it was a good learning experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Really gets you get your feet wet.
Oh yeah. Get my ears wet. I mean, we really, really dove in head first, but he had a lot of prior knowledge and experience. So, I think it worked out the way that it was supposed to. I was exposed very quickly in my late teens to just a little bit of everything. And that includes venomous. We would go out herping and, in Alabama, you have only a couple species available, but it was always so exciting to stumble on like a cottonmouth, or a copperhead or, a king snake in the road. Like it was always really, really cool.
Any snake in the wild is the most exciting snake you'll see.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was how we got our kicks. It was just road cruising is what we called it. We didn't even call it herping, but he would see something in the road and scream, snake, snake, and it was just the biggest thrill.
That's awesome. So after you parted ways with him, how did you continue to evolve in your hobby and eventually meet your husband and become business partners as well?
Meeting my husband is a funny story. We actually met at the very first expo that I ever attended as a customer, and it was his first expo as a vendor.
The cat is running across the screen.
This is Jim. I'm so sorry. He's gonna cameo several times. He does this whenever
it's expected.
Whenever anyone's on the computer, he wants to be up in it. He's 17, senile. He's the star of the show,
as he should be.
Absolutely.
He should be. So you said that you were a customer at an expo and your husband was vending?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier my first boyfriend and I would go to these expos in Birmingham, the Dixie Reptile Show. And my husband was at the first expo that we attended as a vendor, his first time vending. So it was weird and cute. We didn't actually get together for a long, long time after that. I was with someone, he was with someone, we lived in other states. There were actually a few relationships for both of us before we actually ended up together, but we did meet in the early 2000s at the first show that I ever attended.
That's so cute. That's like the Romeo and Juliet of the snake world. I love it.
Yeah. It's a little fucking fairy tale, you know? It's great.
I love it. So at that time, what was he primarily working with, or still a little bit of everything?
When I met him, he was actually like a chameleon king of Mississippi. He worked with veileds, and he was the best at breeding veileds. He dabbled in a little bit of everything. His dad's an entomologist, a published entomologist. He was actually chairman of the biology department at Ole Miss until a few years back when he retired. But so he grew up around, bugs, animals in general. And when I met him, he did a little bit of everything, but definitely best at veiled chameleons around.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you said that you kind of got started with your first boyfriend and you were just doing a bit of everything. So besides the road cruising, as you called it, how did you get into HOTS specifically? And what was your transition like from more traditional animals into the venomous realm?
Yeah. Well, I always had an affinity for HOTS, I always thought they were just beautiful and misunderstood. And at a young age, even, I recognized that they serve a purpose, they have a place. And so living in Alabama, I was restricted to what HOTS I could work with. They have pretty strict laws. Basically, if it's not native, you can't have it. And back when I first started working with reptiles, you could get a permit for more exotic animals, but they stopped issuing those a long time ago and didn't grandfather in anyone except zoos and universities, maybe, like very, very specific.
Yeah, we've had the same things happen in Ohio.
Yeah, I have a friend from Ohio. He told me he actually lives in Texas now because
a lot of people
Ohio
make that move.
Real strict, real quick. So
yeah, we had an unfortunate incident where a gentleman released a large number of large cats and bears, and then unfortunately did kill himself. And it was a complete 180 from our laws being rather generous with what you were allowed to keep to just completely shut down and strict within the course of like a year and a half. It was an unfortunate situation.
Yeah. It only takes one instance like that to just, change the entire hobby. Legislation gets changed after mega events go down like that, and it affects everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially people who do this as a livelihood.
Yes, especially.
So as you're saying that you've always had an affinity for HOTS, what you first started working with, and how did you kind of grow to develop the collection you have now?
Well, back when I was in Alabama, I had, I would go herping and, catch a cottonmouth or a copperhead, and I wouldn't keep it long term. And oftentimes when we would go around either road cruising or we'd go to various local lakes and just walk around the perimeter, and you'd always find something, seasonally, of course. But we started by just walking around, finding stuff, road cruising, taking pictures, and we tried to be little scientists. We would, document length and weight. We would take pictures and just kind of mess around with it, observe its demeanor. And that's how we familiarized ourselves with, HOTS in general, or how I did. So, going out in small groups and having spotters available in case things went awry until we got more comfortable, at least. That was definitely a thing. And I recommend it for anyone that wants to start out. Don't go it alone. But, things various species, different things move, act different, their temperament's different. So we just started out familiarizing ourselves with everything like that, just the basics, bare bones. Mm-hmm. And from there, I would, keep a timber or a cottonmouth that I found, or I had one of my uncles called me one time and said, "You're lucky I love you. I have a rattlesnake in a 5-gallon bucket. You better come get it." So, but it was all kind of catch and release after some observation. And that was my intro to hots. It was kind of organic. Mm-hmm. And not separate at all from my intro to reptiles in general. They kind of happened at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And so did you eventually transition to a more formal mentorship program, or were you more primarily self-taught?
I would say more primarily self-taught, but then again, the guy that got me into this and my husband later on were so experienced already that they were kind of my mentors. And then mm-hmm. When I started going to expos and making connections, networking and stuff, I found just a plethora of really solid, qualified, experienced people that I could pick their brain. And it's just been a gradual incline from there,
Mm-hmm. So I know that a lot of people, I put out a question to people asking what they'd like to know about working with venomous and being in the venomous hobby in general. And one thing that came up was, how do you find a mentor? So I know that you specifically work with some younger people as interns in your facility and helping out. So what has been the process like for you becoming a mentor, and how do you recommend other people find that?
Yeah, I do have a couple of interns. I'm down to one now, but mm-hmm. they have gotten in touch with us through like their school groups, or any time that we've had someone come and work for us, it's been either a friend of a friend, word of mouth, basically. Mm-hmm. And we don't mind educating and mentoring, but it's a serious commitment on a lot of different levels, and there's mm-hmm. Liability and, all kinds of things. So you, as a mentor, you are forced to be picky, and mm-hmm. Everything has to be on your terms. And if people, can't comply, or the stars just don't align, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that can be forced. As far as where I live, I actually moved from Alabama to Mississippi, not only because my husband lived here, but the laws are so much more forgiving.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is it like to get involved with HOTS in Mississippi?
Well, Mississippi is, as my husband says, the last bastion of hope when it comes to working with HOTS. There are a handful of states that have very, very lenient to no laws, basically. Mississippi is one of the more lax, I would say, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Mm-hmm. But as far as legislation goes, they really only regulate indigenous species. So mm-hmm. Mississippi's ass backwards in the fact that you can own a gaboon viper with no permit. Now, barring city ordinances and things Correct, like right. that. But for most of the state, you are not required to have any hours logged, mm-hmm. a mentor, any sort of permit whatsoever. They do regulate native species, though. And mm-hmm. The way that they do that is pretty simple. If you have an in-state fishing and hunting permit, which is about $10 a year, you can legally own 4 of any species as long as it occurs in the state.
So 4 of each species, or just 4 of any?
Okay, so 4 of each species, but you can't go over 24 total of any
native,
of natives. Period. Yeah, you can only have. Yeah,
is that with venomous and non-venomous?
It's regarding venomous.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the laws get a little more twisted when it comes to non-venomous. There are a lot of things that you can legally own, but you can't buy or sell. You
Right.
know? Yeah.
So with
So
laws being rather lax in your area, what is your protocol when it comes to selling venomous species or breeding? Like, how do you work to ensure that anyone who is buying or working with your animals is qualified to do so?
we mostly sell venomous out of state at
Okay.
expos in,
Mm-hmm.
say, Texas or Louisiana, where
Mm-hmm.
there are permits required and the laws are a little different. So basically, I have printed out a liability waiver
Mm-hmm.
that everyone has to sign. And if we are selling in a state where permits are required, I need to see your permit.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain states that kind of have a grace period where I could legally sell you a snake and then you have 30 days to get said permit and said
Mm-hmm.
hours. Once you sign that release, that's on you. But just to be a responsible keeper and breeder and vendor, I'm definitely going to want to talk to you for a hot minute and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're qualified. I don't necessarily require experience. It's a case by case basis. You can
Mm-hmm.
get a
Yeah,
good read on
absolutely.
people.
Everyone needs to start somewhere as well. So,
Right. So yeah, if I talk to you and you have an outlet for hours logged or a mentorship or whatever, and you seem like not a dumbass,
harder and harder to
then
come by nowadays.
girl, absolutely. But yeah, it's a judgment call ultimately, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just kind of walking the tightrope between wanting to educate the public and get people on board to support these species that are so underrated and unloved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, making sure that you don't put somebody on the news
Yeah, absolutely. And
indirectly, like,
jeopardize our hobby
and
as a whole.
jeopardize the hobby. Exactly. The hobby
Mm-hmm.
that we've all worked so hard to, make a stable thing and a way of life and a career and
Mm-hmm.
just,
A community.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So going back to us kind of mentioning that everyone has to start somewhere. So when we asked people for questions for you, a question came up of where do you start as far as first species when you wanted to get into venomous? Would you go with something native? Would you be more interested in potentially a rear-fanged venomous animal? What is your general protocol for a new venomous keeper in that regard?
I would say it depends on your region.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend natives because, simply put, if worse comes to worse, you have access to antivenom. Ideally,
Mm-hmm.
hospitals are going to carry the antivenom for native species over something more exotic,
Mm-hmm.
king cobra, for instance. So it does depend on where you live in. I started with copperheads, cottonmouths, and I like to recommend them
Mm-hmm.
to beginners, mainly because of the toxicity level.
Right.
Copperheads are notoriously weak, but
Still don't want to get bit, but yes.
still no joke. Yeah, I know, right? But like, yeah, exactly. So rear fanged, I don't even know. I barely even count them as a beginner venomous because they don't act like the majority of truly potent species.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you want hardcore experience, honestly, my recommendation is to start out with a really, really pissy colubrid, a Vietnamese blue beauty,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, and then you can learn to judge their movements, dodge bites, and if you get bit, it's no big deal because it's
Mm-hmm.
a rat snake.
Right.
But and then from there, you can move on to something like a copperhead or a cottonmouth, which are very defensive. So you're going to get that behavior of,
Mm-hmm.
I want to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that I guess that would be my recommendation for beginners. But everyone has their preferences. I've seen polls on Facebook about like, what do you think is the best beginner snake? And or beginner venomous snake. And it's all across the board. You know, a lot of people recommend gaboon vipers, and because they're so slow. The only thing do fast. Yeah. The only thing they do fast is strike. Guys. So, not my recommendation, but I see it all the time, you know. Not to mention the length of the fangs and the probability of not being a dry bite. It's just, I think that's a silly recommendation for a beginner, but everybody has their own opinion. So I'm not knocking anybody, but I would start small and just go with like a really, really aggressive colubrid, and then something that's venom is not as potent as your next step up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really great advice, especially with the pissy rat snake. That's not something I would have thought of, but it makes sense.
You got to do something to make yourself comfortable, you know, with that attitude.
I get tagged by my green trees more than I would like to admit. So I don't think I'm nearly ready for venomous.
You know, come to think of it, a green tree wouldn't be a bad intro to that, because they can be a little pissy, and those
depends on the ones you're working with. No, it's a fun species to work with, but especially during COVID times, I can always tell when I've got a bite on my hands because the amount of hand sanitizer I'm using.
That's always, you don't even know your hands are as cut up as they are until you sanitize. And it's like, no.
Absolutely. So
it's the worst.
We had a couple other questions about like learning to work with HOTS. And one thing that a few people mentioned was proper technique as far as learning to use hooks or learning to handle venomous when you don't necessarily have the hands-on experience with a venomous animal. And then also just to generally get your opinion and view on free handling, which we know is a hot topic nowadays.
Definitely controversial. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Okay, let's talk about it.
So getting into HOTS in general, you have your priorities. You have to be responsible. You have to be accountable. You have to be methodical, present, and focused. You never, ever, ever want to get complacent or cocky, you know, and it's difficult to do when you've been working with them for, you know, as long as certain people have. But it's just so responsible to always be present, and being sober helps a lot, you know?
Do you have like rules set in place for how you interact with your animals and what your requirements are for your state of mind and such?
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, I'm drinking a beer during this podcast, as you can see, but I've already dealt with all my cobras and vipers and whatnot today. So we do have strict like sobriety policies, you know. You definitely want to go into it with a clear head and just be as competent as possible. Never, ever, ever not pay attention. And as far as handling goes, I have gotten more comfortable over time, like it does, you know. When I first started out, I never would have dreamed about putting hands on the back end of a cobra or a big diamondback or something, but each individual situation might call for specific behavior or protocols. And that's something that you have to feel out over time, whether it's personal experience or watching videos and taking diligent mental notes on what people are doing versus what they're not doing. I can't stress how being present and paying attention will pay off, you know?
Mm-hmm. And this is going back a little bit to before we actually started recording. If you don't mind speaking to, you said that you currently have a cobra that is dealing with an abscess. I'd love to learn more about how you work with animals that might need treatment that don't allow you the hands-on as much as like if I have a ball python that's sick, I can
Yes.
open their mouth and stuff. How do you work with those situations?
I have watched much more experienced keepers than myself do the thing and, just observed what they do, how they do it, the order that they do it, their pace, their just everything about it. And it's never a sure thing, but tools as far as working with things that you can't actually physically put your hands on or you shouldn't. Tools are your best friend. Hooks, tongs, tubes, safety boxes, transfer bins, long tweezers, just anything, no matter what you're doing or, what procedure you're going through and working with, the proper tools are your best friend. They're paramount to safely doing what you're going to be doing. So I watched a friend of mine, he did me a solid recently and told me to bring him my sick cobra with an abscess. And he and his wife drained it and doctored it. And I watched everything that they did, knowing that I would probably have to do it again. It's just all about learning constantly,
So this is kind of like a good segue into another question we had is, you obviously, first of all, I have to apologize to all the sirens. I live across the street from a hospital. So if
That's
you feel like
okay.
you're getting pulled over, if anyone's listening in the car, you're not. It's just my house.
So funny. So funny.
So how do you get over the fear of working with a venomous animal and go more towards a respect for working with the animal? Because I know personally I have limited experience with hots, but I've worked with diamondbacks and I have worked with copperheads just very minimally. And I know that a lot of times I am more scared than I am actually, as present as I should be. So how did you learn to get over that part?
Sheer experience and starting out really slow. Like you don't need to, be an expert handler on your first day. You can just observe. You can do a lot of research and do things at your own comfort level. You never ever want to get ahead of yourself. Even after all these years, like I've been working with, rattlesnakes and native Southeast species, venomous species for almost 20 years at this point. But I've only been working with more exotic African and Southeastern cobras, vipers, things like that for about 5 or 6 years. So not near as much, but it's baby steps. And you always want to know your limits. I'm really big about like admitting when you're not comfortable in a situation and not forcing it, things have to happen organically. I have some hard drawn lines in the sand. I will not work with mambas. They're too fast. And I will not work with anything with spitter or spitting in the name.
Is that just a personal preference? Is that previous experience or?
It's not, well, barely any previous experience. It's mainly the fact that I'm lazy and don't want to wear eye protection. I feel like that's it's a sensory hindrance, for me. Like, so I'm just not comfortable there. And so it's a hard no, as far as anything like that goes. Yeah. And I think that, what it roots from is years ago, we wanted to do a friend a favor and sell his Indo-Chinese spitting cobra for him. And that was the first nightmare that I've ever had about a snake. And it was one of those where you wake up in your dream how you fell asleep. So I was in my motel room in a different city, like where I was going to sell him. instead of him being at the show like he was in reality, in my dream, he was in a crate that was open in my room.
Mm-hmm.
And bad things happened in the dream. So that might have left an impression on me. But I felt like that was definitely a hard, you don't want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is beyond your bubble and your comfort level. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's incredibly admirable because, something we talk about is that there's often an ego associated with reptile keeping and venomous keeping also.
Oh, sure.
And to have the, the knowledge of yourself to be like, this is just out of my comfort zone, and you respect other people who can do it, but it's not for you is really, really nice.
Yeah, sure. My husband and I have talked about like there's a certain magnetism that comes with owning these animals. Tiger King is a horrible but amazing example of what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, you can be an absolute piece of shit and people will gravitate to you because of these animals.
Right.
So I do agree with you that ego plays a large part in that. And it's hard to, abate that.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to not have it be prevalent. But especially, just the kind of people that seem to be drawn to this industry, we're not all upstanding, conservationist style, like, let's preserve these species type people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not really how the hobby was started, so.
Absolutely no. And people like praise all these old school keepers for, founding this industry. And most of them were just horrible. Most of them were criminals.
Name names, but yeah.
No. Never naming names, but we know. And I'm not talking shit either, really. Like,
they know.
They've had it said to their face, I don't need to be the one to do it.
Right.
But yeah.
And with, thinking about egos and not necessarily working with the best people, how has your experience been as a woman in venomous? Because I know that's it's becoming more prevalent and we're seeing a lot more people, especially in our women's group. There are a decent amount of female keepers who have HOTS, but I feel like when you talk about people with HOTS, there's not a lot of women that come to mind. And how has your experience been in that regard?
Not bad, not good. I feel like the fact that I've been in it for years now, I'm just starting to maybe be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. I don't really think I was ever not taken seriously, but I haven't really noticed any difference between being a female working with HOTS specifically and being a female working with reptiles in general. It's kind of the same general attitude. Okay. I do think it's funny when, say I'm at a venomous show and, somebody asks, well, who cupped up all these rattlesnakes? And I'm like, that'd be me. And they're just, their mind's blown, but why not? I'm the only one here. Like, I'm the one behind my table. Who else would have done it? I don't know. But I get that in general, working with not HOTS, at just any old run of the mill show. In the beginning, it bothered me. It's taken a while to not, because it does get to you, to put forth so much effort and not be acknowledged or appreciated. So that, and that's what you're talking about with ego. So I'm human. It's been a bit of a battle, sometimes more than others, but nowadays I try and find the humor in it. Mm-hmm. For instance, it was so funny to me last summer. I was at a show in Kansas City, Missouri, and a guy walked up and I had a male employee with me, and it was just me and him. And the guy walks up, customer, and says, I greeted him, of course, I was like, hey, how you doing? Can I answer any questions for you? Because he seemed like he was waiting. And he said, oh, I'm going to wait on him. And I said, oh, you mean the guy that works for me? And yeah, But and it's also satisfying to like, have people wait in line to talk to male employees of mine and then just get sent straight back to me because
Yeah,
yeah.
I've
So
I haven't been on that side of the vendor table, but I've brought some guy friends to shows where they're greeted and asked a question, and I'm like, nah, hey, I'm the one with all the snakes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's that's a common occurrence. It was a conversation I was having with someone earlier today. It was it's frustrating, but you're right. There is some humor in it where you just kind of have to shake your head and be like, well, they'll learn. They'll figure it out, and it just makes you look cool too.
Right. But, I think it takes a while, at least personally for me, it took a while to find that place, where I was okay with it instead of being defensive and feeling like I had something to prove, because that's kind of, I don't want to generalize, but it seems to be a common theme in our group and, with females in the industry in general, that they aren't taken quite as seriously sometimes. And I'm just glad that we are, in the throes of dispelling all of that and proving that we are just as worthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are seeing that a lot. We're working really hard to change the stereotypes and the stigmas about it. So yeah.
Now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a specific question. I'm not going to mention the gentleman who asked because I just don't know if he wants to remain anonymous or not. But he has a daughter who is really into herps and is very young. And he wanted to know what you think are like some good things to be teaching her, and if he should be teaching her that she needs to work twice as hard, or she should just be working as hard as the men that she's being compared to, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm not a fan of the double standard and, the idea that we should be working twice as hard just to make the same impression. So absolutely, like, you do you. And if you're passionate and dedicated, eventually you will, be successful, I guess, in whatever you set your mind to. And that goes for, whether you want to work with hots or, leopard geckos or whatever. Just, I'm all about being the best that you can be. And I feel like it's sort of counterproductive and self-destructive to compare yourself to other people. You're always going to end up feeling bad. You're always going to end up feeling incompetent and inadequate. And that's just not fair to yourself. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. So you need to be the one to call the shots and set the standard. And as long as you're meeting your personal requirements, you're winning, Yeah. Especially for little girls, like they just have so much to compete against. And this shouldn't be one of those things. You should do it because you love it and because you're good at it and because it makes you feel good. And when it starts being toxic and a competition, like those are reasons to question why you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like incredibly well said.
Thank you.
So going into competition a little bit, so this is changing gears a bit. I've had a conversation with friends before where a lot of people who are into reptiles have either been brought into the hobby by a partner or have brought their partner into the hobby. So having gotten together with your husband and both of you having been active in the hobby, did you find any competition there between like what you were keeping and how you were keeping it? Because I always joke that if I'm on Tinder or something and a guy has a ball python, I'm like, oh shit, I can't. It's like, oh man, I think there'll be a little tension there.
Oh man, yeah, because you wear the pants.
Well,
I do. No, that's a good question. Actually really like this question because so many people, I don't even know where to start, but I'll start here. So many people just assume that, my husband is the big bad man and works with all the lethal stuff. And I do like the cute little beardies and dragons and stuff. It's not quite the opposite, but it's, my husband is the geckophile. He likes the cute little flighty, not handleable geckos, all the little micro species and stuff. Mornings, days, like flying geckos, on into bigger stuff like Smith's green eyes and tokays and Halmahera giants. He likes his geckos. I mean, he likes everything. We all do, but
we all have an affinity towards one thing, though.
Right. And I think it might surprise people, and it does surprise people when they learn that he likes the cute shit. And it's more me that is trying to kind of advocate working with more exotic, like hots, trying to diversify the collection when it comes to different vipers and cobras and rattlers. Like that's where I really get my kicks, is working with that. That's where I'm satisfied. So meanwhile, you get me in front of a flighty little gecko, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I look like an idiot. I've got a catch cup. I'm just chasing it all around the room. It's ridiculous. So I'm way more in control with like a hook or some tongs in my hand, and with species that are more predictable, at least to me, But yeah, we do balance each other out really well, though. In answer to your question, like I can see how a lot of couples might struggle to work together, and don't get me wrong, not every day is amazing, there are disputes and ruffled feathers sometimes, but overall I feel like our strengths and our weaknesses balance each other out very well. He has his kind of focus for the business, and I have my little niche, which is he's all about the booking of expos and monitoring finances and making sure that like we're going to grow a certain percentage each year as a business. And then I'm all about the record keeping, hatch dates, feeding, shedding, genetics and lineage. Like that's kind of where I shine. I'm really meticulous about that, whereas he has other fish to fry. So there is a balance there, and kind of since the beginning, it's been really cool that we've been able to fall into this rhythm of divide and conquer. Whether that means our specialties, our preferences, what we actually value in this industry. In addition to that, there's the traveling, the constant travel that we do for shows, So one of us is at home tending to breeders and fresh babies that aren't available for sale yet, and the other one is traveling across the country and selling it and doing the damn thing. And we try to rotate up so neither of us gets too burnt too quick, which is a juggling act. But
right, absolutely.
I feel like we do pretty well in general.
So with, speaking to your business, I'd love to learn more about specifically what you do, if there's certain species that you are more commonly producing and selling, and then also talk a little bit about your education programs. And, as you call yourself the Cobra Queen of Mississippi, like, what do you do? What do you do to show that to people and to bring that education to an area that does still have that fear of snakes?
So the backbone of our entire business is basically leopard geckos and bearded dragons. And people don't believe me when I tell them that, because it's not like what we're outspoken about and what we're passionate about, but we're really, really good at it. And it's what I recommend is beginner reptiles, or, I like to call them gateway reptiles. That always gets a laugh out of soccer moms.
Yeah.
My
My first reptile was a leopard gecko, so I get it.
Right. Yeah. That was maybe my third or fourth, it was beginning of the line for sure. Because they're so good in that regard,
Mm-hmm. I've got
you
one
couldn't
sitting on my
ask
desk right
for,
here.
Oh, bless. I love it. I've got a 24-year-old girl out in my building, and you wouldn't even know to look at her. She's just thriving. So they're so hardy. They always look like they're smiling. They're stupid easy to care for. And, I feel like that is where we shine, even though it's not necessarily one of our passion projects. Same with beardies,
Mm-hmm.
They actually enable us to work with what we are really into.
Mm-hmm.
And, the money that we make from that, we filter back into things that we do want to work with. Also back into the projects themselves. But
right. So with beardies and leopard geckos, are there specific projects or morphs that you're working with more, or are you working with more traditional normal animals?
We do have some stuff that I am really proud to work with that is not as traditional as something you'd find in a pet shop. We have been getting into carrot tail viper geckos a lot.
Very cool.
They're awesome. They're basically like a tiny, tiny leopard gecko, just as handleable. They like it a little more arid, but they're amazing animals and just the cutest things on the planet. The hatchlings are the size of your thumbnail.
I remember you posting that picture, and I was like, that can't be real. That looks like a speck of dust.
I know, right? The camera doesn't even want to focus because, it's so tiny. Like it doesn't even know where to focus. So those are really cool. We're especially proud of our Malaysian flying gecko breeding project. Tychozoon coolei is the Latin, and Tychozoon lionotum. Recently, I feel like they might have been reclassified to the gecko genus, which I can't
keep up with that. I can't keep up with all the reclassifications. They did it for all of the green tree pythons, and I don't know the difference.
It's such a headache. I try so hard, Dom, and I just can't keep up. And it's especially bad in the tarantula and scorpion communities. But even shit that I've memorized 10 years ago, I still kind of sporadically check in on Google just to make sure that it's still classified the same. And I've been called out recently for the viper geckos. I was still calling them by their former genus, and now they're Hemidactylus, which who knew? Apparently since 2008. So oops, but it is a lot to keep up with. That's definitely one of the, headaches for me, is just all of the evolution of that and changing in the industry, and which I did want to talk about at some point, how, and that kind of bleeds into it, how I hate the term expert, anyone that identifies as an expert.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I hate it. And I do have people that I would call an expert, but they would never, ever refer to themselves as such, And I feel like that is just the healthiest mindset, because, and we go back to complacency here. Once you think you know, you don't know anything, So I feel like that term should be abolished.
So I would look at you and think in my head, oh, she's an expert. She knows what she's talking about. But with the mentality, that you're not, what are you doing to actively continue to learn and better yourself as a keeper, and then just an educator as well?
I am constantly researching species that I already work with, just to make sure that I'm doing them justice and doing right by them. And anything that we want to get into that might be new or foreign, I over research and just trying to spread that education to the general public for things that we sell. Repeating it kind of solidifies it for me. So it's good to constantly be researching, constantly be checking up on things you think you already know. And sometimes it's frustrating. There are days that are like, I shouldn't be looking this up, but hey, I find something new. I just recently found out, and you were probably privy to it in the group, about mourning gecko males.
Yes, I just learned about that too.
Dude, I've been breeding them little shits for years. I didn't know males existed. Like, I hope nobody's pissed at me that has like a male that I might have produced, because I know I've produced over 600 of them, and that's the ratio.
Well, how would you know?
You wouldn't, because I don't sell adults. I sell babies. And I'm like, oh yeah, talking them up at shows. They're all partho. And then educating people on what parthenogenesis is. And then I come to find out literally 3 weeks ago, I guess, that no, males exist. They're just really rare. So now I'm like, oh, I'm slacking.
Yeah, well, it's I think it's so interesting too, because we're in a hobby that is constantly evolving. Like, things are constantly being discovered in our hobby every day.
Right.
We can never know everything, even about the animals we have.
Yes. Yeah. But I like that though, the fact that things are evolving and we're learning more, and we're not just stuck with, I have an entire bookshelf of amazing hardback, like reptile books from like the 70s and 80s. They're completely irrelevant. They're all out of date. Like, nothing in them is accurate anymore. But I like that though, because that just means we're doing these animals justice, and that goes back to what you were saying about, like, don't ever let your ego override anything, really,
Right. Absolutely.
My husband's fond of saying, don't let your ego override your pocketbook. Like, don't let, that speaks for itself, but,
especially in this very expensive hobby.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've had to turn some animals down because I'm like, man, I have to eat.
Yeah, I know. And it's rough. It's always rough. Like, I have really bad willpower and discipline. So
yeah, I get it. I have an animal budget. Just every month I can put money away for a new animal, because I know that if I didn't do that, I would just buy an animal and not have the money for it.
You have to budget for it. Absolutely. And if I didn't, I would be just where I was at 17, seeing Jackson's chameleons, not knowing what they are, but I have to have a trio. Like,
That's why your husband does the books, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that goes back to strengths and weaknesses. I am damn good at caring for these animals and providing all the knowledge, and he is damn good at money. So we're just going to let that ride, as long as we can, as far as it gets us. And we personally have done really, really well so far. I think that has a lot to do with just consistency in the industry, being a constant face at shows and a name in the like kingsnake.com classified sites, things like that. Just people constantly seeing our names and our faces. It makes someone more comfortable buying an animal from someone that you see at every show versus someone you have no idea who they are.
Yeah, it's just on Craigslist or in a random Facebook group.
Yeah.
So speaking with your constantly learning about the animals you're doing, how does that reflect in your husbandry? Because I know that oftentimes people who are larger scale breeders or have more projects they're working with do have a tendency to use simpler husbandry, which doesn't make it bad. It's just simpler. But how do you, most specifically, how are you working to advance the husbandry and keeping of your breeder animals that are going to be with you longer term?
Yeah, I like that question a lot because I am actually making efforts to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Being breeders, we do keep a lot of animals in racks,
Mm-hmm.
but only things that would thrive in them,
Right.
And
And
we,
it's a viable way of keeping, it's an accepted way of keeping,
sure,
not against it or anything. I have my
for
rack
certain
system set up.
species,
Right, exactly.
absolutely. Yeah, for appropriate species, racks are just fine. Um, they're convenient, they're affordable, they're, just all the wins.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't get to see the animals. So you do have to check in on them a little more often just to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they're doing okay. And that is the
Yeah.
thing that comes with racks, unless you have like vision racks.
Right.
Um, which even so, I would crack those bitches once a day just to make
Mm-hmm.
sure. But
They always
yeah,
poop in the water bowl and then you can't see it.
I kind of like when they poop in the water bowl
Oh,
because
it's
it's
definitely convenient.
I feel like it's the most considerate thing they could possibly do. So I'm with it. I always
Mm-hmm.
thank them profusely after I curse their name because I have to change it. But yeah, so we do have kind of an equal amount of rack systems and more homemade kind of vision style cages
Mm-hmm.
for our bigger animals that we do want to keep constant eyes on, boa
Mm-hmm.
constrictors, Burmese pythons. We've gotten on the bioactive train,
Mm-hmm.
which
That's a
seems to
popular train
be,
right now.
it's a huge popular train. And we are facilitating it because after noticing how much better it looks, first off, it
Mm-hmm.
looks so much better. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does it look better, it's more functional, it's less upkeep and maintenance. It seems to mimic the natural habitat. So I've got nothing against it. And then my husband, who is the like financial powerhouse here, is like, well, let's make our own dirt. Let's sell moss. Let's sell resurrection fern branches.
Mm-hmm.
So we are capitalizing on this bio movement and it's benefiting us and our animals. We
Mm-hmm.
personally use everything that we sell. And we also sell to a lot of dry goods vendors at these expos.
Mm-hmm.
They are selling our moss and our branches and um, not necessarily our dirt because anybody can make dirt, but
Well, I'm gonna have to send you a message about some moss because we're gonna have to talk.
hey girl, I got you.
My moss hookup.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, have you noticed that there are particular species that are doing better or that you wouldn't necessarily use bioactive with? Because I know, for example, you work with beardies and leopard geckos a lot. And there's kind of the old wives' tale of they can never be on loose soil or they can never be on anything but paper towels. So how do you notice that those kind of animals are working with potentially bioactive setups?
Well, obviously, the more tropical animals are going to thrive more easily and more quickly
Mm-hmm.
than anything. They're the easiest bios to set up, and
Mm-hmm.
we're keeping basically any tropical gecko, any chameleon, anything like that on bio.
Mm-hmm.
But I have gotten a lot of flack for the way that I keep my adult leopard geckos because I do keep them on sand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've always waited till they're at least 18 months to do so, but personally, I've never had any issues with it. I keep them on fine grain calcium sand because not only have I never had any problems with them ingesting a little bit, it's just extra calcium. They're large enough to poop it out.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to do that with a baby, of course,
Mm-hmm.
or, a subadult even. But my adults have always thrived on it. It's maybe an additional mouthful of calcium for my breeding females. And you can scoop it like a litter box.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I'm a fan of. I definitely do not recommend that for beginner keepers until you are aware of all the pros, cons, consequences of doing so. But I have been keeping adult leopards on calcium sand for almost 20 years without one death from impaction.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you, how do you feed your animals then that are on a loose soil like that? Are you tongue feeding them bugs, or do you have a dish for them, or do you let the bugs just run around the enclosure and then they hunt them?
I like to encourage natural behavior in my species, so I do allow them to hunt. Now, when I dump the bugs in, first of all, I don't have time to tongue feed. I'm sorry. Like,
no, I mean, I figured as much, but just was curious.
No, absolutely. We ran the count on our breeders, and we are working with like almost 100 leopard geckos alone.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's too much.
I don't have time to tongue feed each individual one. And I do group keep my females of appropriate size. Males are always kept separate unless they're breeding. But I do keep my females in groups of 2 or 3, unless that's not possible. And sometimes it's not, but case by case, yeah. I just dump the crickets in there. I like to encourage natural behavior and hunting skills. I feel like it keeps them from being so fat, because they do get fat.
Oh, yes. I got some junk in the trunk.
Girl. And that's what you want, So it's great. But like, not only do I not have time to tongue feed, but I really like to see them do their thing. And 9 out of 10 times, if I'm dumping crickets in there, I'll absolutely sit and watch for just a second to make sure that nobody nabs a tail instead of a bug or whatever. But like I said, personally, I've had 0 incidences feeding and keeping adult leopards on sand for almost 20 years. And I know that's mega controversial, and I'd probably get a lot of hate. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for that. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm not advocating it. But as a breeder, this has been the way that I've been successful. And I can honestly say my husband and I have produced thousands of baby Leos at this point with no mortality to the adult female breeders, the mamas,
Yeah, that's incredible. That's while controversial, it is a way of keeping that is accepted and commonly seen. And like we've been talking about is evolution and how keeping occurs, and you have to continue learning.
Right.
And I'm sure if something came out that showed you a horrific side effect of what you're doing, you would be the responsible keeper and change.
Oh my God.
That's what we have to do, right?
We have to, but it doesn't even need to come to that. You get attacked anytime that you publicize any sort of well-meaned advice. Somebody will straight up ask for advice, and unless it caters to like just what they want to hear, basically, you're a villain and you're a horrible person and you're a murderer.
You see that all the time. And that's why in our group specifically, we have that rule about no husbandry policing, because there's no one way to keep these animals. We're never going to be able to accurately replicate the natural environment to the T that they came from. So keeping them the best way we know how that has been successful is the most important thing.
Right. And responsibly sharing that with people. I got chewed out in the group from someone for saying that you can keep adults on sand, and her argument was beginners don't need to ever do that ever. And while I understand that, like, I was just offering my personal opinion, my experience. And I never once recommended that they do what I'm doing. I just wanted to throw another option out there. And it was not met with like any kind of understanding or
well, luckily that's an uncommon reaction in the group, luckily.
The group is amazing. That's why I agreed to be an admin. I've never done anything like that before. It's really fun to be in a group where you're among like-minded females, that oftentimes are going through what you're going through, and you can share advice, and it's a safe environment. And you should be really proud of what you've done. I'm proud of it.
I mean, thank you, but it's what we've done. I just
Well,
stuck my name on the front of it.
Newcomer, but yeah, like you've been so gracious and awesome to me, and it's just the whole vibe of the group in general. And yeah, there's going to be some shit talkers and some naysayers, and there are going to be days where we don't know what to do because there's drama blowing up, but that's life,
At the end of the day, it's a Facebook group. Like, this is just a podcast,
Yeah.
Who cares? No one really knows us.
Right. Yeah.
So I think this is, a good time to transition into talking about who are the women that you look up to in the hobby, and who have been the people that you've that have helped grow you as not only a keeper but a woman in the hobby.
I feel like that question should warrant some sort of answer, like someone famous, like a female Steve Irwin,
Right.
And I don't honestly have any of those, but I do have some friends that I truly do look up to. And it's funny because they're both younger than me, but they're amazing women in their field. And the first one is Hayden Lears.
Oh, she's awesome. She's incredible. I look up to her.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I do too. She's probably a solid decade younger than me. I know she's super young, but just so motivated and with it. And from the moment I met her, I guess it was about 2 years ago, probably at Conroe, Conroe. She was doing educational lectures at Hertz with cobras and stuff. Wow. And I was just like, this girl knows her shit. She's amazing. And then I met her, and she happens to be just a gem of a person and just a total sweetheart.
So, and she's so cool what she's doing with the falconry now.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Girl, yeah. So she was super into hots for a while. She was really into monocled cobras, at least that much I know. And she's recently slimmed down her collection to focus on falconry. I know she still has at least one monocled. But yeah, she's gotten more into her red-tailed hawk goose.
I know, and, so cute.
I got to meet him in Austin. It was amazing. And I have a phobia of birds, as weird as that sounds.
Really?
I am
That's very common.
phobic.
I'm afraid of earthworms. So
oh, honey.
Hey, I'm not afraid of birds, okay?
Okay. But I get a lot of shit for being afraid of birds when I work with like reptiles and venomous, no doubt,
Yeah,
so
that's how I feel about worms. Yeah, I get it.
Funny. Well, I've met people that are phobic about frogs, so to each their own, whatever, I guess. It's very funny. But yeah, Hayden is just the coolest. She's so down to earth. She's got the best head on her shoulders, and she's one of those people that anything she sets her mind to, she's going to be the best at, because why do it if you're going to do it poorly?
Right.
So I have the utmost respect for that, for sure. And I did want to mention one other lady tonight, Ariana Levine.
I'm not familiar with her.
I fucked up. It's Ariana Levine.
Okay. I'm not familiar with her.
She runs Safari Tales in southern Mississippi. I want to say around the Hattiesburg area, but right outside of it. She and her parents run their own private zoo. She has some wild shit like lemurs, camels, zebras, several different species of monkeys. She's just got a spider monkey. He's adorable.
Oh, those are so cute.
But she also does she's got her own aviary, and she works with retics and berms, and she just her business motto is love the unloved. And when I found that out, I was like, we need to be friends.
Yeah, I love that.
She's such good people and so knowledgeable, and just a blessing for the whole industry. I feel like.
Yeah, she sounds lovely.
She's doing some really amazing things. I can't believe she's not part of our group.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look her up because I haven't heard of her before. But that's why we're doing this, to introduce people to some new faces and names that they wouldn't necessarily know.
I would recommend Ari. Safari Tales is her business, and Tales stands for Teaching About Animals in Live Shows.
Okay, cool. So she does education programs as well?
Education programs, birthday parties, private tours. She has a sloth that she does sloth encounters with. Like, it's just...
Oh my God.
I haven't been, but I want to go. Her place sounds magical. She's a friend of mine, but I only see her when we've in Louisiana shows.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too about this hobby. Is I would say some of my best friends I've only met once or twice because they're through the reptile hobby. Like the two of us, we talk all the time, but I've never met you.
All the time.
This is our first face to face.
And it's great. I was really excited about like finally putting a face and a voice with a name and being able to interact, not just on Messenger. Like, this is nice,
Yeah, it's excellent. And I realized we completely skipped over a topic I wanted to cover, which kind of goes back to what Ariana is doing. But can you talk a little bit more about how you run your education programs and what those entail for you? And then I would also love to know how COVID has affected that and how we can work to support you and your husband and, help get the word out about what you're doing.
That's amazing. I really appreciate that. The education programs were just kind of like a filler almost. I don't want to make them sound insignificant because they're of the utmost importance to me. As long as I'm doing this, we may as well educate people, right?
Right.
So our primary income has been reptile shows and online sales, which thank you for touching on COVID. I wanted to mention that when the shutdown first happened and shows were getting canceled, we had to resort to a complete online business. We had to flip, everything.
It's been weird.
It's so weird. And to adapt to it, luckily, my husband, Eric, is so good at that already. Like,
he knows how to work the Zoom call.
He does. Yeah. He should have taught me before now because I'm coming across as a complete amateur. But yeah, he's the tech savvy one. So he was doing the kingsnake.com ads. And because he's been in the industry as a reputable vendor for almost 20 years, we were still able to pull through just fine when COVID hit based on online ads. And yeah, the business did need to adapt. We, instead of prepping for shows, we were prepping to deliver to FedEx, which by the way, we live in a tiny, tiny, tiny town. It's called Water Valley, Mississippi. It's in the middle of nowhere. Oxford, where Ole Miss is the closest town to it. So FedEx is not just, let's drive 5 minutes down the road. It's an hour round trip to go to FedEx.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it was definitely a little bit of an adaptation, but it was no 12-hour trip to San Antonio,
Right.
So, we made it work, and I'd say it worked out very well, just based on the fact that his name was a recognizable one and our name was recognizable on online forums. So we really didn't suffer through the shutdown, which I don't expect that was your typical takeaway from the shutdown. I know a lot of people's businesses went under, and a difficult time for a lot of people. But yeah, we just immediately converted our business to strictly online, and which presented its own set of challenges, but it worked out okay. And now shows are back open. So I'm sorry, what was your original question?
No, don't apologize at all, because I think this is such an important topic to talk about. And I know some people might not want to hear about COVID right now, but it has had such a profound impact, on how life works and how business works.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled to hear that you have been able to continue to thrive, because I want nothing but the best for you.
Thank you, love.
So before COVID was happening, talk a little bit about the shows you were doing and how you were educating the public and such.
So way back in the day, we would do Repticon shows. We haven't been with Repticon in a long, long time. We had fundamental differences in the way that business should be done and ethics and whatnot. So no offense to any individual that works for Repticon, but we quit doing their shows about 4 years ago and have done bigger and better each year as a result. So we have filtered our efforts into shows that value conservation and education and things like that, more of those values, such as HERPS, which is, the Houston Exotic Reptile and Pet Shows, run by Sean Gray and Lori Gibson.
I've heard only great things about them.
They're amazing. They actually like hardcore filter their vendors as much as possible,
Right.
So they run a good, clean show as much as they can for vendors and customers alike. They don't have death dealers. They don't have dog fighters, former convicted dog fighters,
Yeah. No need to name names, but once again, we know.
We know. Yeah. So, but Sean and Lori are like really diligent about just filtering the trash, and making it a good show for all. They don't offer exclusivity for anything, but they also don't want 75% ball pythons. Like they're definitely going to try to make it more variety than that. They're amazing. We also do a little Southeast Expo called CF Exotics. They run shows in Jackson, Tennessee, Montgomery, Alabama, and Huntsville, Alabama. And they're more all exotics. So you can see like where they're legal, foxes and exotic cats and birds and more, non-reptiles, but still reptiles. And they put on a really quality show. And then, so we've just started doing like higher quality shows where the promoters genuinely have their best interests for their vendors at heart. And there's a happy medium somewhere. We still do occasional online sales, but if any day's a good day where I don't have to drive an hour to FedEx and back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And so when you are looking at those online sales, going back to venomous a little bit, do you do a large portion of venomous sales online?
None. We've been pretty particular about that because Delta had a thing for a while where they weren't shipping venomous, and I'm not even caught up. They may or may not be now. I think they are back on doing it, but the reason I'm out of the loop is because we never really messed around with that to begin with. We always did our venomous sales locally because I want you to sign the waiver. I want to talk to you in person. So, and not to mention shipping hots is like an all day affair for us. The airport is not close.
Right.
Like, so we have we've always had a $500 minimum on venomous, which has kind of deterred anybody from being like, oh, ship me a copperhead, ship me a rattle, like one single animal, unless it's something really high end. It hasn't come up yet, but we do not ship venomous just kind of as a thing. We would if the situation called for it, but it never has. And it's made our lives easier as a result, I feel like.
So you mentioned Delta and how far the airport is. For people who don't know, can you explain the difference between shipping a non-venomous animal and what it takes to ship a hot?
Oh, sure. There are certain species like invertebrates, tarantulas, scorpions, anything like that, jumping spiders. You can ship through USPS. And now, with the way that they've been functioning lately, I wouldn't count on live arrival or anything. But talking about legality, you can legally ship bugs through USPS.
Does that any toxicity bugs, any level of venom that they could put out?
Obviously, they have to be properly crated and contained and everything.
Right, of course.
I am unaware of any legislation prohibiting, say, like a centipede versus curly hair tarantula. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, I can Google it.
But yeah, no, I'm sure you can. I don't know. But because the amount of shipping that we do is minimal anyway. So, but I do know that, the majority of tarantulas, inverts in general, because they all have a toxicity level, but those are illegal to ship through USPS. Things like any kind of snake, turtle, tortoise, etc., needs to be shipped through like FedEx or UPS. Which we do FedEx.
That's my preferred.
Yeah. UPS has burned us a couple times. So we like FedEx, and we're at the point now, actually, it's kind of nice where we drive 30 minutes to our FedEx location and they know us because the packages are marked clearly as they legally have to be.
Of course.
Either live animal, live reptile, live harmless reptile, for instance. And then do not, according to season, do not heat, do not freeze. So our local FedEx facility is so sweet. We'll walk in and they're like, "What are you shipping today? What's in this box?" Like,
my local precious. FedEx knows me too, but they don't get excited because I always slice the box open at FedEx just to make sure everything's alive, make sure I get the guarantee.
So you give them a heart attack straight away.
I don't. I don't, but they know who I am now. They're like, "What did you get today?" And I'm like, "It's a gecko."
Oh, that's funny.
I just have to, because I have to bring them back to work when I pick up from my FedEx. Because so I always pick them up in the morning and then they sit on my desk at my cubicle until I can go home for lunch. But
nice.
So you ship harmless reptiles through FedEx, but what do you do for the hots?
They have to go through the appropriate provided airline. For a while that was Delta. It might be again. Honestly, that's not my forte. I don't ship hots. I receive hots occasionally, but due to COVID, we haven't gotten any shipments. We haven't even tried, that's just not where our focus is right now. But honestly, I'm not so versed in shipping hots. I know how to, theoretically. I've done it a couple times. It's always been through Delta. It's always been a pain. It's always been an entire day for me commuting back and forth and whatnot. So we just, we've said $500 minimum for shipping, and that's been a good deterrent for anybody wanting us to ship. They're like, "We'll just catch you at your next show."
Well, it also makes them think. They're like, "Okay, well, do I really want this? Am I going to drive to Tennessee to get it?"
Yeah, I'm not trying to talk anybody out of it, but we just have so much more success selling in person at shows, and that way I get to feel the customer out. And we have always reserved the right to deny sale to anyone that we feel is unqualified or incompetent or just rubs you the wrong way, gives you a bad vibe. And that should be your right as a venomous vendor.
Or as a vendor in general.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So we are hitting right about the 1.5 hour mark. So I have a final question for you, and then we're going to wrap this up if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So I didn't prep you for this one, but I want to ask. If you could only keep one species of venomous and one species of non-venomous, what would you choose?
Yikes.
I know.
Yeah, no, that is a toughie. Okay, I have one species of venomous and one species of non-venomous.
Can be snake, lizard, invert, whatever you want.
Oh, fucking yikes, girl.
I know, right? That's why I kept trying to figure out. I was like, what is it? What's your affinity? And you were like, everything.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant question. So for my venomous, I think I might pick an African species of cobra.
Okay.
Whether it be banded Egyptian. I do love my banded Egyptians so much. They have so much variety and personality. Some of them are dicks. Some of them are loves. Some of them I have thought about free handling. And then some of them I'm like, oh God, you couldn't pay me to put my hands on that snake. Like they just vary so much. They keep me on my toes. I really like that. But man, what a tough question.
Right.
This is one of those questions that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be like, you dumbass, you answered wrong.
That's why I was like, I got to catch her off her guard because it makes you think about it a little bit more.
Okay, so I was actually thinking about, this might not answer your question, but wish list species tonight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking because I don't know that I have very many wish list species. I just acquired a pair of scrub pythons, amethyst pythons.
That's awesome.
And a pair of anacondas, like
green or
anacondas.
Yellow?
Green.
Nice.
I had a pair of yellows back in the day. I loved them to death, but we wanted greens, you know? Mm-hmm. So the right offer came up and we sold them. We sold the shit out of them. Mm-hmm. But we finally got a pair of CBB baby greens.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's hard to think about bucket list animals, but I did think of one tonight that I wanted to mention if you ask the question.
So what's a bucket list animal?
Well, yeah.
What's your bucket list animal? There you go. There's the question.
It's not necessarily what non-venomous would you keep for the rest of your life, because I don't even know. I haven't had them, but I have a feeling that it would be my bucket list animal. It's one of the few things I have never gotten a chance to work with, but they always impress me when I see them in person. Do you have any guesses?
I literally have no idea. Because you're so all over the board with what you keep and what you have.
I know
that I feel like fair. I couldn't even guess.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. Eastern indigos.
Oh God, yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because how can you not?
How can you not? They look like a damn cobra.
Right.
But you can have them around your neck. That was how I met my first Eastern. It was at a reptile show in Knoxville or Charlotte or I don't even know. But this guy came around with a 8-foot Eastern indigo on his back. And I thought to myself, that looks like Griselda. Griselda is my biggest monocled cobra.
Okay.
So I was like, that can't be Grizz, but it looks just like Grizz. And yeah, so just a handleable Cobra-esque, like, you know, that would fulfill the need to put your hands on something, quote, dangerous, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's an excellent answer.
Yeah.
So, Elise, I think we're kind of reaching the end of our time. Can you please let people know where they can find you, where they can look at your animals if you're interested, and where you are on like Facebook, Instagram, all of that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I tried to start a website years ago, and it's just too much upkeep for the overturn of what we've got. So we are very prevalent on Facebook. You can find us at facebook.com/E, the number 2, and the letters EXO, E2Exo. And then from there, I have an Instagram where it's mainly reptiles and some cameos of my geriatric puppy and kitty, sweet boys. And that's at Instagram.com/E2Exotics.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, that was Elise Lago. And I want to thank everyone for listening to the first official episode of the Modern Medusa podcast. Elise, it has been an absolute pleasure having you here today. My name is Dominique DeFalco. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm DeFalco Reptiles on Facebook and Instagram. Another huge shout out to Joe Phelan of Port City Pet for putting on this podcast. And thank you to everyone who's been so supportive so far. And if you're interested in joining our Facebook group, it's the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers group. So, Elise, once again, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Dom. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. We'll talk at you next week. Thank you.